From MS-DOS to MMORPG to mobile, the impact of Warcraft games on game design and culture can't be overstated, and I can't wait to dig into that legacy with our two incredible guests. I'm joined today by World of Warcraft Senior Art Director Ely Cannon and Associate Technical Director Darren Williams. Combined, they have a combined 33 years of experience working on World of Warcraft. Please make them very, very welcome.
Hey, everyone.
Darren and Eli will take as many of your questions as they can at the end of the talk, so please submit them via the QR code on the slide at any time. To kick things off, Darren, could you introduce yourself for the panel and tell us a little bit about your role at Blizzard?
Sure. Thanks, everyone, for having me. I am Darren Williams. I'm an Associate Technical Director on World of Warcraft. I've been on the game about 15 years. I started as a gameplay engineer. I became a gameplay lead, and now my current role. I've worked on every expansion since Cataclysm, primarily on kind of spell effects, combat, but I've worked on a lot of aspects of the game with designers and artists, animation, items, server infrastructure. So if any questions about that, I can answer many things.
Pretty cruisy job then.
Yes.
Eli, could you please introduce yourself for everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. I serve in the role of Senior Art Director on World of Warcraft. I'm responsible for the entirety of the art in the game, all the illustration work. Also provide art direction to that, work with the illustrators, work with our cinematics team to make sure that the cinematics represent our game worlds, but in photorealistic representation. I also work with the consumer products group for the merchandising and wonderful objects that everybody probably has at home, shirts and plushies and all those fun things. Really, just to maintain the look of the game and make sure that we're always providing the most awesome experience for everyone.
I'm really curious to hear what each of your first experience was with a Warcraft game and what hooked you about it.
Ooh, I'll go first. Yeah, so the first time I actually was exposed to Warcraft was in our local hobby shop. It was called the Unicorn Castle, and at that time I didn't have a PC of my own, so it was really the only opportunity I had to play the game, and it was a by the hour rental PC, and I remember spending countless hours in front of it with the proprietor of the store standing behind me smoking a cigar, watching my progress.
For me, it was my dad installed this new game, Warcraft Orcs and Humans, on our PC. I wasn't playing a lot of games myself, or not very well then, but he played, I watched. I sometimes moved the orc around, and I think kind of the new genre at the time, or one of the earliest entries in real-time strategy, kind of fell in love with it from there, and went on to play Warcraft 2 myself. Held up the phone line playing dial-up with my friends, and that was kind of my intro to the franchise.
These two early games that you've just mentioned, Warcraft Orcs and Humans, 1994, and then its sequel, Tides of Darkness, 1996, inspired a huge wave of RTS games in the 90s. And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on what makes them special and what their impact has been on game development.
I think for me, I played a lot of those RTSs, but there was always something about the setting of Warcraft, the fantasy, particularly a fantasy setting. I read a lot of fantasy, and the feel of the game. It felt more responsive and real. The impacts felt more real, and I think there was a lot of precision in how you could play that game that really lured me into gameplay itself. And it also had, Warcraft 2 came with a map editor. I remember playing around with that in the time and building maps and kind of getting curious about, someone makes these things, makes these games. How can I do that? So that was really impactful for me and my career and what I wanted to work on. But it also set these characters in motion, these factions, these other races, particularly Warcraft 2.
Yeah. I mean, for me, early days especially, I think that Warcraft really set itself apart from so many other parts of the fantasy genre, and that it didn't take itself too seriously. You know, it could be fun, it could be lighter, and you know, I think for that, it's always had a special appeal in the fantasy genre, above and beyond so many other fantasy games and movies out there. And then also the ability to create your own maps, like that is so fun. As a creator, having the ability to go into a game that you love and immediately be able to, you know, express yourself and play through the things you're making. It's a wonderful thing.
I remember like clicking on every single character as much as you can to hear all the silly voice lines, and you know, that detail is awesome. But
and it's super fun. That spirit is really carried forward, and all the things that have come after.
Not surprising based on those answers that you two became game developers, I think. It's interesting to me that you've mentioned sort of that levity as well as the responsiveness and the combat impact, because I did want to hear a bit more about how those early Warcraft titles influenced the development of and direction of World of Warcraft. Very different genre, but same things.
Well, that development started before I joined, but I can obviously talk a little bit about Warcraft. World of Warcraft itself carried that that sensibility of client responsiveness, I think, through the game, and it's what set World of Warcraft apart when it first launched from other MMOs at the time, to a very you know, you press a button, you feel something immediately in the game. The impacts, the combat, you felt that as well. And I think the main through line for me is kind of the story and the setting of the world of Azeroth, though.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think too the storytelling, right? Like, especially as we move further into the RTS games, you're getting into Frozen Throne, we're really starting to introduce iconic characters and places that come alive in those games. And having been able to build on the back of those stories and carry those, you know, nostalgic, beloved characters forward and continue to tell their stories. I mean, it's a huge opportunity. And I think the Warcraft franchise overall has so much depth in the space of its lore and its world building. It's just rich with those opportunities, and it's given us the ability to, you know, do this for 30 years now and really continue to build the world, continue to tell those stories. And I think it's such a fun thing about the working on it too.
For sure. I think Warcraft 3 in particular, where there was a lot of parts of the world filled out, and then I've told this story before a lot on this trip as well, but my brother started playing World of Warcraft before I did, I was always more into the RTS games. Hadn't played an MMO before, but when I saw on screen that he's running his dwarf through Theramore City, I was just like, I have to be in this world that I love, in close, and go and see Jaina and all those kind of things. And yeah, really cool.
Yeah.
It's a pretty remarkable legacy, and World of Warcraft has a 21-year legacy of its own across 10 major expansions, countless updates and new content releases. And I'm interested, you've mentioned the world itself being a sort of primary character, I suppose, of the game. And I'm interested to know what you see as the defining elements of that world. What makes World of Warcraft feel like World of Warcraft?
I think that it has a seed of believability in it. I think when you're creating a fantasy world, it needs to have that core that your human experience can latch onto, right? You need to be able to take that first step into a space that isn't real, but feel as though it could be. To feel at home there, to feel that you can have adventures there, you can have relationships there, that the characters are part of a living, breathing space, and that you know you're feeling it out as well. So for me, I think that's really the core thing that we're always really chasing, is that ability to transport every single person that plays it into that fantasy world, to pull you out of the real world and give you the opportunity to be someplace special, you know?
Yeah, I think, and we fill it with, things to explore, things to interact with, experiences to have, but it's alive because of all the players and the community in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just people, us included, choose to spend our free time in the space and with these characters. It's, your capital city is like your second home, or, wherever you set your Hearthstone, I guess.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think over the years we've seen, and I think also we feel a real connection to the place, and there have been times when we've changed it, and there's real emotional reaction to it, love it or hate it. People feel so connected to the world, so connected to the characters in it, that when we do dramatic things, when we make big choices about those places and those characters, it really affects everyone on an emotional, deep level. It's really, it wouldn't be possible without that depth of storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, we did Cataclysm, the first expansion I worked on. There was a lot of reasons for that, but it changed the world so much.
Did.
Yeah.
It did.
I'm really interested in this idea of the world being a sort of persistent place that feels really alive. And I'm interested from your respective disciplines of art and engineering, how do your teams sort of contribute to or support that feeling of Azeroth being a place that exists and feels responsive and alive?
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, how about that? So on the engineering team, and I am across a lot of different sub-teams, the tools team, the server team, systems team, the gameplay and the user interface team. So it's features for experiences in the game, like delves that we just released, but it's also how you build the world, the tool set that we do it, how we place creatures in the world, the spawn system. And that's probably the biggest way the engineering influences it, is literally with the tools, WoW at it, and its ability to build the world, place the amazing art that Eli's teams builds, and control the spawns, the timing, and then allow them to be dynamic. There are zones you can go to that have changed significantly, and you can go and talk to an NPC and see the previous version of it, or you can travel. You can literally travel to a different timeline to see what Outland looked, before Draenor was destroyed, I guess. Yes, before the unpleasantness. But all that kind of those pieces, is a big collaboration between engineering, art, and design teams for the spawn placements.
Yeah, I guess I would tell a story a little bit. Thinking back to Battle for Azeroth and Kul Turas, the continent of Kul Turas, and thinking about the Kul Turan people and trying to bring a culture to life. It was a really interesting project because we thought about how would a marine-based society who had, landed in this new land and built, a new civilization, made a new start, what would they do? So it really starts with thinking about what does a culture need to survive, and then translating that into potentially the industries that they might take part in. So if you think about Kul Turas, when you initially arrive there, you arrive in the main city itself, on the exterior and in the area that they welcome visitors. You immediately see the seawall, right? Why do they have the seawall? Because they're deathly afraid of being, conquered, being taken over, being destroyed. So they're immediately trying to protect themselves. Secondarily, we start to think about, well, they're not just hiding, right? They've been on the run. Now they want to be a power. They want to be a force to be reckoned with. They would never want to be taken advantage of again. And so we start to think about the industries that they would employ there, especially as a marine-based race. And we started to really think deeply about that and determine, of course, they're going to be building a navy, right? So every part of their society is taking on one of the active roles to build out all of the industries that we need. You know, in Drustvar, you see Waycrest Manor, for example. Now, they're not involved in the marine stuff, but they're guarding that side of their continent so that the other folks can live safely. You know, we have a town that's focused around pig farming. Well, they're, you know, harvesting the pig poo, you know, to mix with peat to make gunpowder. And then you have the foundries that are making the cannons, and the shipyards that are building the ships, and the priests that are blessing them before they go out to war. And all of those parts of the culture coming together create a sense of reality, a sense of a civilization that is working together towards a common goal, and doing it in the absence of outside influences, right? It's a thing that's happening in the world, regardless of everything else. And those logics and those puzzle pieces fitting together are the things that make those cultures feel alive and bring the world to life too. So that when you're in it, it feels like a real place. It feels like people that have struggles and concerns and hopes and dreams, and they're acting on them, and the world is being affected by their actions.
It was, as you were telling that story, maybe another story from the engineering perspective is the War Within, and how we came to build underground zones, which, you know, we kind of knew we were building the War Within, and we were going to delve down, delve literally in the gameplay sense as well. But so we started with in Dragonflight with Zaralik Caverns, the underground zone, and that was kind of the first, you know, we partner with design and concepts, like how are we going to get this together. And you know, in the game you can go into caves, and we call them micro dungeons, all over the world, but we haven't had a whole zone that is kind of stacked on top of another with its own server simulation like that before. So we built new tech and working with the design world builders to be able to transition. There's under the hood a seamless transition as you go through those tunnels. We had to build them of a certain length because we were dragon riding at new speeds we hadn't before to cover different specifications of machines. But all that was to work towards this concept for War Within as well, where we knew we would be starting up on the surface on Isle of Dawn and diving down in the coreway and having this really like layered terrace stacked world, so we could use that tech for it. But that started as an idea, right? And the tech serves that.
Yeah.
We were speaking before the panel about the fact that World of Warcraft has a dedicated lore team. I wonder if you could sort of talk about what the lore team do and how you work with them, just prompted by you speaking about the cultures of the different places.
Yeah, I mean, to start with, let's just talk a little bit about the creative process. There's a fairly small group of people that get together, some of the directors, associate directors, leads of teams, and, you know, like our visual development leader, get in a room and start jamming. And really talking about the themes, the stories they'd want to tell, the characters. And part of that, of course, is still being contextually correct in the world and leaning on the lore that's been established. And of course, we've worked on the game for a long time. It's 30 years in, right, on Warcraft. There is so much information, and not a single one of us, not even Mr. Metzen, has it all in their head. So really the lore team is there as a resource to keep track of all of this deep knowledge, all the specificity of who was where at what time and what weapon did they have and how did they get it and where did they go after and what were they even thinking in the moment. And I can tell you that in almost everything that we do, they play a part, you know, whether we're working on a new 2D animation, you know, like the Illyria piece that we did, or we're working on a cinematic, or we're trying to determine, you know, what would a character do. And we can go back to the lore team and say, like, where have they been? What events have happened in their life? What have been those moments that might be informing their decisions now? And for us, it's an invaluable resource across the board with everything we do. And I think, you know, it's a very small team, but they're so passionate and dedicated, and, you know, really have been around, I mean, I think as long as I have at the company, honestly. Collecting this information, just immersed in it every day. So yeah, I mean, we couldn't do it without them, quite honestly.
This actually leads very nicely into my next question. You sort of described step 1 or maybe step 0 of working on a new expansion. And I was really curious about that process of creating art and environments for a new expansion and what the sort of early steps are in that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start this one and pass it off to you then. So it can go a number of ways. It can be that we have, a place that we want to explore, a specific theme, environmentally or world-wise, a place that has been in the lore that we might not have ever been. Or it can be, seeded by a story that we want to tell in the beginning. But either way, the sort of first process after determining what the sort of largest overarching theme is going to be is really a broad amount of exploration. We can generate 200 to 300 individual grayscale thumbnail images of a particular theme to try to figure out what's going to be the most exciting visual to wrap around. For example, for The War Within, we did an entire exploration on caves. We've done all kinds of caves in the game. We've done crystals and lava caves and, fungal caves, all different sorts. And so when we start to talk about these themes, it's really important to us that when we're taking you all to a new place, that's what we're doing. We're taking you someplace new. We're giving you a new experience and really transporting you to someplace you've never been. And that does require that we dig deep and really push beyond the, normal tropes or the things we've done before as much as we can. Now, that being said, we also try to bring in the logic of the world when we're doing that too, to help inform it, to make sure that it feels like a cohesive vision overall. So it's really where it starts is with a lot of exploration, and not limiting ourselves up front.
Yeah, pretty early on, that same group, there's a group we're working on that I work with for The War Within. We see, all of us, engineering and design, also see some of those. And it's inspiring kind of how we feed off each other. I was thinking of Dragonflight here, where I was thinking of some of the early ideas of the whole continent. They were really kind of inspiring the mechanics that could go along with this. We knew there's going to be dragons. We knew we probably were going to do dragon riding, but they were capturing that kind of open space, soaring feel that we were going to go for with engineering. And then other times, one that springs to mind is we went to Argus, which is a destroyed, shattered world, and we were talking about what that looks like in the various pieces and how those zones would fit together. It really kind of inspires we're going to have a fairly different zone here with chunks of the world in different places and how they'll connect, and we start having those discussions about how's the flight paths work in that situation, or how's the map look when you press M.
That was such a fun one to work on.
It was.
It really presented an interesting challenge because we had very constrained land masses to work with, but we really wanted it to feel like there was more beyond the playable space. And it was the first time that we explored the use of extension matte paintings, which was a tremendously challenging thing to do. Typically in a movie, when they're employing a matte painting, it's going to be to a locked camera, right? We know in an open world game, you're moving. And so everything we did had to be painted in perspective to work no matter where you were in the zone. And it was a tremendous effort. I honestly was so proud of the artists that pulled it off. I think they grew even during that project. It was amazing to watch. And you see that all the time, the developers rising to the occasion to solve the problem that we're putting in front of them.
Yeah, I think one of the next things they're Is this too detailed, by the way?
I'm loving it. Continue.
We had the Vindicar there, and the Vindicars are going between those zones, and we had the whole flight path was teleportation networks. There was a lot of stuff that kind of like fed off each other, and how we built that zone, and then the Vindicar itself could upgrade and change as you progress through the story. But I think some of that we've got looks like Ardenweald up here on the screen, and some of that obviously inspired Shadowlands in some way, where we had very distinct zones that were like
Ardenweald was an interesting one too. We really leaning into those natural themes gave us so many opportunities to tell really fun stories, specifically with the sort of insect occupants of the zone. And initially when we were talking about them, we talked about them as a decompositional element in a forest, right? If you think about it, the ecosystems of a forest, there's always one that's sort of destroying and one that's building up. And it's really fun to explore those themes in World of Warcraft.
Another thing that took place alongside this very beautiful concept art by Eli was a major graphics update to the terrain and environment around Wrath of the Lich King.
Yeah, Wrath of the Lich King.
I'm really interested to hear, given that World of Warcraft has this sort of very painterly illustrative visual style, how you balance major graphics updates with retaining that style and identity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge and a responsibility, certainly, and it requires a lot of partnership with all the other teams, especially engineering, especially the graphics team. And for that particular update, it was an interesting challenge. One of the reasons that the world was sculpted the way that it was before, and if you remember in Burning Crusade and Classic, the rock forms were very soft and round everywhere. Part of the reason for that was really the way that the engine drew the terrain and the way that it LOD'd things in the distance. It wasn't at that point capable of really retaining sharp forms. And so when we moved into Wrath of the Lich King, and had that desire to increase the fidelity and really lean into very specific intentional forms to tell a landscape story, right? Like at this point, we'd really been telling the story of the people. We'd been telling sort of color stories, but we hadn't really been thinking a lot about natural systems that inform the way a landscape will actually present, erosion and other elements that come into play. But it was really important to start thinking about that here, and the shapes, of course, that resulted were much more specific, sometimes sharp and jagged. If you look at Ice Crown Glacier, certainly big, and we really started to lean into longer distance views and really setting up these landmarks that would guide you through. If you think about the Twin Peaks at the back of Howling Fjord, right? Two singular mountains standing at the back of a zone, really became a visual marker. And the engine had to change a little bit to be able to support that. So that's really where the partnership between art and engineering comes into play, because we have to start early talking to each other. We have to partner with each other very specifically and solve all those problems along the way so that we can achieve these joint goals.
Yeah, I was going to ask, with the process of something like this big graphics update, how that relationship works. Is it art, briefing, engineering, both of you more collaborative?
It's definitely collaborative. Wasn't there for the Lich King one, but Eli mentioned LOD, which is level of detail. We have a lot of different level of detail systems in the game now, more that have been added since, but the view distance is one in particular we talk about. Like the view distance are greatly increased since even Wrath of the Lich King, and some of that is about how we can level detail the terrain versus the models like Ice Crown Citadel, but that all comes from like what is the feeling, that what are we going for? We want to see across these vast distances to have a feeling, right? And I think probably Legion was where we started pushing that even more. Like I was thinking of Suramar City in particular here.
And it's interesting too, because I think when we were talking about extending the view distance in Legion, our initial reaction is, well, no, that it won't feel like WoW anymore, right? Like it wasn't what we were familiar with. It wasn't what we were comfortable with. Of course, as soon as we saw it, right, the engineers that implemented and showed us as an example were like, oh, of course, yeah, let's do this, right? Because it really allowed us to build these layered scenes that had so much depth and could just really lead you through spaces in a way that we were never able to do before. And I think Legion, I mean, it really benefited from that technology.
Yeah,
it really did.
You could see it from Dalaran looking out, or from the high mountain area looking down, and you could see all those kind of layers. And that expansion, in particular, each zone had a very distinct feel, and it was cool to be out in the high spot and see all of those areas. And we also very deliberately let you pick your zone to go to first in that. Right. So it was cool to to see all that, see it on a map, and kind of visually choose where you go. So I think it all played together really well.
Yeah, and you mentioned High Mountain. I mean, really the relationship between High Mountain being as elevated as it was and all of the surrounding terrain, it wouldn't have worked as well if we hadn't have extended the view distance. But it really allowed us to push the dynamic of the landscape in a way we'd never been able to do before. And I think it really, it up-leveled the game in a big way.
Yeah, some of that, we have an engine team that is always working with the art team and improving that kind of, those kind of things. But we built new LOD systems for terrain in particular to support that. You mentioned the sort of soft hills before, but capturing kind of the edges of that, the shape, the silhouette.
Yeah. It kind of spread across a lot of the game too, because if you think we're drawing more of the game and more of the terrain at this point, it means more grass and more trees and more rocks and, honestly, more spawns at times too. And it's something we found in Suramar City eventually, because we had spawned it so densely, because it was such a lively place with so much going on, we very quickly discovered a really interesting feature or bug with the bounding boxes of the characters.
Yeah. We our game, like many games, it tries to reduce what it's going to try and draw in any frame, which is often called a culling system. And to do that, you have some bounds on your models, like your character model, and
especially the NPCs.
Right? NPCs. So yeah, and it's usually, in this case, we discovered that the zone was running a fair bit slower than we expected, and the NPCs had a very huge bounding box on it, so ones that weren't even on screen. It's meant to happen a little near the edges of the screen, but it was rendering basically everything when you wandered around the city. And I can't remember if that was a specific bug or not, but there is a real case that happened later, similar with the Wandering Ancient Mount. If you know that mount, it has
that's right where he throws the leaves.
Yes,
up. Yeah.
It has a seasonal variety. One of it throws the leaves a long way, and it's baked into the animation, and that made the bounds of the model enormous, basically, where the leaves were coming from off screen. And yeah, same kind of case. We're like, what's going on here? And it's because everybody loved their new mount, and we're hanging around in the capital city on it. And we have a lot of tools to fix that when we discover it. Sometimes we get it later. We do our best to find it ahead of time, but the Suramar had a lot of interesting challenges from that point of view. That was not just the NPCs. It was kind of the first time we made a real big functioning city populated by NPCs doing kind of their own thing. And we did a raid in it, and the raid was in the outdoor space.
Yeah. It's interesting that those moments where we run into these problems organically are the moments sometimes where we really push the game forward and we unlock whole new opportunities that we haven't had before. And really, that was the first time where we really pushed the NPC density to that level. And since, we've continued to do that, and it's allowed us to create worlds that feel more alive. And you think about Kul Turas again too, in that city, there's an enormous amount of people running around there. And think back to Orgrimmar, it just wasn't like that back in the day, So it it's really interesting that we sort of push the boundaries, find ourselves in trouble, solve the problem, and kind of organically push the game forward. But that's everybody trying to push every envelope all the time to make the coolest thing that we possibly can. And sometimes we break it and have to fix it, you know?
They're good problems to have, but yeah.
I think what you said earlier about this sort of like broader horizon feeling not like, or you being concerned that it would feel not like WoW, really interesting, particularly in the context, Darren, of the combat update that you led on Legion, which was the first major combat upgrade since World of Warcraft launched.
Yeah. So, we're continuously updating a lot of parts of the game, and in Warlords of Draenor we had updated character models to the high definition models now, which I just call normal definition, and that allowed it a lot more fidelity of animation in hands, fingers, face. And
huge.
Kind of the next thing we wanted to update, as you keep updating things, it's like, okay, we want to update the combat animations, but what does that mean? So kind of a small strike team was formed. I worked with an animator, effects artist, a designer, sound designer, and it was just to kind of look at that, and we started with like just sort of playing and feeling the game. I play Warrior as my main, so I don't think that was the reason I picked Warrior, but that's why I was working on Warrior first. And we looked at like Mortal Strike, which is an instant cast ability in the game. Most of our ranged abilities, not all, but abilities with a cast time have always felt really good in WoW, because you basically press the button, you get a cast bar, and you start playing an animation straight away. It feels responsive, and then sometime later a fireball is launched and hits the target. But Mortal Strike and melee abilities didn't do that. They basically, it would send the message to the server, wait for a response before starting, and there's reasons for that, but one of the main ones is to check, can you actually use this ability? Do you have rage mana or whatever it is to do it? But kind of like 99% of the time, you know what that answer is on the client. So really we wanted to make it feel responsive like the other abilities. So we cut that out. We assumed it would be yes, and then we started playing the animation. And we also updated a lot about the animations and the spell effects themselves. We wanted to keep the spirit of the animations, how they kind of looked, but adjust the timing so they had a bigger build up and a snappier impact, and then through that impact play the weapon trails, synchronize the damage event with the actual animation event when it hit the target. We did directional sparks, we did like hit flashes, all sorts of stuff there, and it still needed to feel like your class before. So I was using Mortal Strike mainly there, and we took the actual animation that Mortal Strike originally used. The animator I worked with did those timing adjustments, so it still felt like it had the bones of the animation, still felt like this was your character that you're used to playing and the button you're used to press, but it just felt better in a lot of different ways, engineering, art, and animation.
That was a huge joint effort, really.
Yeah.
And it touched just about everything about the characters too.
Yeah. After that prototype, we then went on like, we can make this work for everything. And it was a big effort from there. So that's when, other engineers joined the project, and the animation team spent a lot of time on that. But it's something, here we are. Yes. So on the left, this is Mortal Strike. On the left was before, and on the right is after. I recorded these for a presentation I did to Blizzard Engineering sometime after Legion launched. So you can see on kind of left, it's not really selling the motion. Definitely the damage numbers don't seem to impact it really any time associated with the animation. And the weapon trail itself is not it's not really indicating the motion. Not seen here is it also happens responsively when you hit the button. The weapon trails were designed to, really sell that animation. as well. Yeah. I can talk about this all day if you want to hear more, actually.
I think it's really, this idea of like the WoW feeling is really interesting, particularly in the context of the release of WoW Classic in 2019. And I'd really, really love to hear from both of you how the team approached capturing that 2004 nostalgia for a contemporary audience. I imagine it's a bit more complicated than just dusting off the box, shipping the 2004 version.
Yeah. The Classic project obviously is also about the feeling you had when you first stepped into the world. I'm just tell a story about when I played it. I'm like, this is cool. I play mainline. I don't think I'll try Classic, or I will, and I'll probably do like 10 levels. And actually, even for that, right, I'll miss the modern animations they added, the new character models, and then I played a lot longer than I expected. I think I got to about 40, got my mount, and then I stopped. But the feeling of the world being so huge and dangerous, and you have to do it with your friends, and the world is the character. That was the feeling, the most important feeling to capture, and I felt it when I played it in a way that I knew we were going for that, and I didn't expect to feel it. So it brought me back to a place in time when I was playing it a bunch. We did minimal changes. We built it on the new I can't remember at the time what we actually used, but right now the code base is mostly the same as the mainline code base. But when we launched it was mostly like an archival restoration kind of project that was mostly engineer initiated. We didn't like rebuild things with our new tools. We were actually kind of bringing it out and getting it running again on the mostly current engine.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the head. Like, there were very few changes, and they were very targeted, really very intentional, and some of them very subtle. Really everything we were trying to achieve, I think you said it very well, it was all to serve the nostalgic memory of it, right? Like, because that's what you had at that point, right? It was a memory of that experience. So like on the art side, for example, we really chose to do very little, and things that were subtle, maybe unconsciously experienced. One thing that really stands out to me or comes to mind as a small change that we made that you may or may not have noticed is we just increased the amount of grass on the ground. It's subtle, right? But it's one of those little dials you can turn to just make it feel that much better. It doesn't change the nature of the place. It doesn't, detach you from that nostalgic experience, but it just makes it a little better. And I think that's a lot of what we did as far as changes is make those little nips and tucks to just make it a little bit better, to solve things that were truly broken, but not to change the core experience, not to change the way it felt.
I think, Classic kind of reminded a lot of us about, a lot of it's about the journey as well, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to rush to max level. You can.
That's what's special about Classic, really, right? Is you take your time, and it is a little more challenging, and you really get to be in the world and experience all the little stories in a way that, sometimes modern doesn't allow you to do as well. But that being said, modern has so many ways to play it too. It really does. It's brought so many systems online that allow you to play for 20 minutes or an hour at a time, and made it easier to group with people to get through content that maybe you would have had to wait in Orgrimmar for 3 or 4 or 5 hours to create a group to do.
I think it's pretty special. It's 20 years of World of Warcraft, and we're bringing back the 20, however many years it's been now, but we've just Cataclysm is out, and this first expansion I worked on it now has a I got their one expansion later than you, and now has a classic release.
Right.
It's pretty remarkable. But our players, we've got something for every kind of player, and that's kind of how we see classic too, right? It's
just been such a cool path to get here, and it's so awesome to be in a world where we have so many ways to play the game now.
We spoke a bit earlier about the fact that internet infrastructure was a little bit less generous and significantly less fast in 2004 than it is now. And I'm really interested with World of Warcraft Classic running on more modern technology, how the engineering team, I suppose, approached the question of speed or responsiveness.
Yeah, I think the philosophy of Classic is it should feel the same. Over the years, we've done things with global cooldowns and tick rate under the hood, and some of that was from hardware necessity back in the time from our server infrastructure. Also, ping times and a lot more people playing on dial-up. There's one like that happened in mainline where we changed the server tick rate. I don't know if people remember the the auto loot. You'd see the items in your loot window disappear. That actually was happening at the server tick rate. So when we changed that and you click to loot a creature, it would all suck out of the loot window so quick, and we're like, okay, we actually had to re-implement that as a client animation because that was part of the feel of it. But so when we brought Classic back, you running on that, you would feel all of that stuff too. So work we had done like that to re-implement the loop, but more deeply through the combat system to get the original feel, even though it was largely a performance implication when it was, but it was part of the feel of the game. So
really?
While the unarchiving project, some of it was straightforward, is then you would find those kind of things. We need to re-implement them.
Were there specific or unique sort of challenges or opportunities that you encountered on the development of World of Warcraft Classic? I think that loot one is a really good example.
Yeah, the timing one is and forgive me, I don't remember the exact term for this, was one that vividly springs to mind. We had to re-implement that. There is we always kind of trying to refactor and improve our code, and some of that removed stuff that Classic needed, so we had to bring that back. So there was particularly some stuff on the way the spawning system worked, which kind of had its own process on the server, and because of that had some different behaviors. So that was another example we had to re-implement. There was there's some differences in kind of how players are grouped together for server simulation that also had to be we call it sharding, but we had to build some systems there that more closely mimicked how realms used to work, where your characters were your server was a realm, and it was also kind of one piece of hardware that was running on, which it doesn't now. We can span server simulation across different pieces of hardware.
Just before we get to audience questions, I did really want to ask, we've spoken about the legacy, the huge responsibility that you feel, the creative responsibility for this world that means so much to so many people. But I am a firm believer that all games are personal games in some ways. And I'm very curious to know if you've ever hidden a little inside joke or an Easter egg in the game while designing an environment or implementing or engineering something.
I mean, for me, it's mostly comments in the code. I didn't really know at the time, how long I'd be working on this game, and I thought Blizzard has these service awards. At 5 years you get a sword, at 10 years you get a shield. I just got my ring at 15, and I thought it'd maybe be 5 years I'd go for the sword. So sometimes someone will come to me and say, hey, you wrote this comment 15 years ago where it's something like, hey, future Darren, when someone questions why you did this was the reason. And I love it when that happens. And I'm like, yep, you can change that to whatever you want. I'm not precious about it. And then some others I have like test items in the game. They're called like Darren's test spell or Darren's test weapon trail, and sometimes Wowhead or one of our fan sites will pick up on those and you can search for them, but there's nothing like public facing that I've put in. Yeah.
I mean, I worked as a level designer for years and years and years. Who has found, I'm just going to ask this, a skeleton in a precarious position holding a rose or holding hands or hanging or a wine glass sitting on a ledge somewhere with a plate of cheese next to it? These are like just fun little things that we do as we're building an area to tell little stories that have nothing to do with the quest, that will not ever be in the narrative, but just, it's like our little signature on a place. And during Wrath, there was actually a really interesting one. So between Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King, we probably spent about 4 months really hard R&Ding on what we could do with the landscape. Like I was saying before, right? We're trying to evolve it and change it and give it a higher fidelity. And one of the things we tried was like, well, can we sculpt things other than landscape, right? Can we use these tools to make bones? Oh, that's interesting. So one day, I was trying to do this and did this kind of like bone dragon that was set into a snowdrift and was kind of exposed. Anybody seen the dragon at the end of the Titan Road off the coast of Dragonblight? It's under the water. Yeah.
Couple of hands.
I didn't know it, but one of the other level designers had pulled that out of a test map, put it there, and didn't tell me until after we'd shipped the game. It was there, So it's that kind of stuff. It's just little fun things that happen along the way that find their way into the game, and players might not know what they are, but they become meaningful, and they're certainly meaningful for us. It's those little marks that we can leave in the world that aren't tied to anything really, but just fun little nuggets, Easter eggs.
There was actually, speaking of level design, you've not just worked on level design in game, but you also worked on a project to create a diorama that won a pretty snazzy award. I wonder if you want to talk about it.
Oh yeah, it was super fun. So it was for BlizzCon. It was a project run by the community team, and honestly, I had the honor to work on it. It was such an exciting thing. We printed 10,000 player characters, Horde and Alliance. They were a heroic scale too, and had set up a gantry crane over this giant diorama of the Lordaeron battlefield. And the gantry crane had a camera on it. You could actually stand there, and there was a list of where your character would be by the grid and watch it kind of pan over the top of this thing. But what you don't see here is the night before this shot, BlizzCon hasn't opened or anything like that. I was out there in those sort of booties, that you would cover your shoes up, walking on this thing, hand placing all of the bushes and trees on it. And I remember one of the associate art directors still tells this stories today as one of his favorite moments of BlizzCon ever. And I mean, honestly, like it's such an awesome thing to have been able to be a part of. The largest video game diorama at the time broke a Guinness Book of World Records. But it was really, really an amazing thing to be able to be involved with.
They asked the dev, was it all of Blizzard? They asked us for our characters for it. So yeah, our characters are sitting out there, dev team at the time, somewhere in that army, and we got them after. It's still sitting on my desk, my Horde Tauren.
It was super fun. I mean, they just did a wonderful job building it. All of the buildings were individually carved and sculpted out of styrofoam, hardened with a composite sort of foam hardener, and then hand painted with all of the appropriate colors and textures. Just a really, really cool project. It took months and months and months of really hard work from a very large team to make happen. So definitely a fun time for Blizzard, and one of the high points of my career for sure.
I wish I'd known that you had your PC characters as little models. I would have asked for a photo of
I think a lot of us still have them on our desk.
Yeah, I'll try and dig it up.
I bet you would.
Yeah.
We've got some really great audience questions.
Sure.
So we might move to some of those. Mercedes asks, what advice would you give to someone just stepping into the games industry, and what drove you through your career, whether personal or professional?
Thank you for the questions. When I'm hiring, which I do a lot in my new role, but we've done interviews, before I was a lead as well. I kind of look, this is like a meta answer. There's three things I look for. One is kind of ability to learn and always be curious. And
that's huge.
Yeah. And World of Warcraft, for example, is such a big code base. There's so many things, and we don't expect anyone to know it all or know how to build the game. But like, I want to see people who are like curious and have experience learning or have ideas about how they will learn. And one of the big ways that has served me in my career is kind of through asking other people. So it's kind of teamwork is the second thing I look for here, in different ways for your learning, for solving problems. Like we're a big team. Sometimes on any size team you'll need that teamwork. And then the third one is kind of what drives you, your motivation of some sort. Is it the craft of games or games in general? Is it World of Warcraft? So those are three things, and not every games industry job will look for that, but that's something that you need on our team. And I think it's funny to reflect on this because those are things that I have used over my career without kind of knowing, and it obviously has worked for this job. But I kind of growing up playing Warcraft, being curious about how this game was made, looking into okay, how do you program these, learning on my own about I knew I needed to learn C++ at the time. There weren't game dev courses that I could go after in Adelaide, so I went for computer systems engineering, but I was kind of doing home projects and teaching myself at the time, and that was kind of how you did it. It's not that long ago, but now there's a lot of schooling you can go to for those things rather than kind of picking up on your own. But that is how I kind of showed motivation to get into my first games industry job without, I guess, kind of knowing that is what it was in a company in Adelaide. That's what they were looking for at the time.
Yeah, I would plus one everything you just said. And I think the passion element is a really interesting one. And I'd point that out because I think it is what will drive your craft. It's what will focus your attention in a particular space. And when you think about an employer, right, is looking at somebody coming in as a candidate or an applicant, the thing they really want to see in that chair is somebody that can step out of that chair into one at a desk and immediately start contributing. Now, I don't mean immediately you're going to be a senior or rock star or whatever, but somebody that can go in and start working and start learning and start really progressing in the craft. And so that passion for a game or a genre can really inform the art that you're creating. For Warcraft, being able to work in the Warcraft style and express yourself as a stylized artist is so important. And it's one of the primary things that we look for in a portfolio is how does your art, how would it translate into Warcraft? Is it already sort of speaking that language? Are you hitting those style notes? Are you hitting those color notes? Are you paying attention to value structure and the dynamic of the line and the motion of the design? All those things are so important. And I can tell you it's so much easier to drive yourself to that goal if you're really passionate about the thing you're working on. If that's realistic shooters, like go all in, like learn how to make the coolest realistic shooter art, the best soldiers, the best guns, these things that really hit that note. If you're working on stylized things, focus there, go all in, be passionate, really express yourself there. Because beyond that style, we want to see your voice, want to see that you're bringing yourself into the work that you're doing. You're bringing all of you, you're pushing it. Another thing I think that's really important, it's going to sound kind of silly, is be nice. Like be a good person, be somebody that, people want to be around and work with and collaborate with and learn from. And it's so important and it's so understated, but the industry is so small. It's so important that every person you talk to, they walk away with a good impression of you, you know?
Yeah, I'd say, you know, keep trying to, right? Like, there's people on our team, and one of them who've applied multiple times, and, you know, and we always try and encourage them, come back and give them advice, what we think to work on or focus on for next time. To kind of jump off what Eli said there about being nice, it's also like, that makes me think about working with other disciplines, right? Whatever discipline you choose, art, engineering, design, production, QA, like having an awareness of how it interacts with other disciplines and how you will work with them is something, you know, I really look for as well. Like stories about how I worked with an artist or a designer to create a feature, and you know, how we build off each other, or how designers, you know, might have said, hey, we could never do this, you know, we're engineers, we can kind of do anything, it's just a matter of how long you want to take writing the code. And so of course we look for, you know, technical ability or C++ or skills, but it's those other pieces that are like less tangible that I think are kind of a better indicator of kind of long term.
Yeah, I have two other things I'll add to this because I think they're so important. Get comfortable with critique. Get comfortable with feedback. Be ready to get it. Like, it is so essential to push these projects forward. You have large groups of people working on a joint vision and goal, and that requires a lot of iteration and a lot of collaboration and push and pull. And it's so essential that you develop the ability to step back from your work and not be precious. You're not developing for your portfolio anymore, right? You're developing for something greater, something bigger. It's a tapestry that everybody's contributing to. And so it's important to be able to step back from that moment and see the whole. And to do that, you have to be willing to be able to accept that feedback, to internalize it, to think about it, and to come back with a solution.
I think it takes a lot of confidence to be humble, like actually.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it really is. And, you know, I think people come into these situations, students especially, thinking you have to be perfect and everything you do has to be right from the start. And it's just not the case. You know, I think the strongest things we make go through a massive amount of change from start to finish. They're honed, you know, just like a blade. It starts as a lump of metal, and over a tremendous amount of work and effort and heat and cooling and everything else, it becomes a thing that's useful, that has a purpose. And it's the same with making a game. You know, it starts as a big lump of things, and it takes a village to pull that together, and everybody has to be listening to everybody else to work in concert, and you have to be able to step out of yourself to do that.
That actually leads nicely into another question here, where an anonymous question asker asks, what is it about your team culture that enables you to keep shipping such incredible updates? Maintaining a 21-year-old game is no small feat.
Thank you, anonymous. Yeah, I mean, Eli kind of said it very well there. One of the things is we've done it for a while as well, and we're always trying to improve that process, but we build in those kind of feedback moments along the way where we're like reassessing, is this up to our standards? Do we want to play this? If not, is it not ready? Well, can we give it later? And I think there's a culture of feedback from kind of anyone on the team. We have a mailing channel, which is just feedback. It comes from everywhere, you know, from the QA to, you know, to senior art director.
It does, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you said it well too. I mean, the culture of feedback. It's an enormous part of what allows us to do what we do, and it's built into really everything. You know, we have dedicated Slack channels per discipline team. You know, the dungeon team has a peer group Slack channel to help associate and mid artists level up, so that senior artists can give direct feedback to the people that they're working with, so that everybody can learn and grow together. And not only that, we have weekly reviews on every discipline team so that your entire peer group can get in a room together and talk about those things. And again, build up that muscle of feedback and humility to be able to move these things forward.
Yeah. I think a lot also comes from not everyone on the team has a different relationship with the game, different kinds of players of the game. But a lot of it comes from that love of the game, right? And you're playing it the night before or on the weekend or whatever time you have, and you saw something and you came in and you talked to someone about it, and we might not change it straight away, but we'll go in the list to work on. And we used to, that would happen a lot. You'd go home and a designer would come in the next day and just fix some bug they found. And as the team's grown, that's changed a little as well, right? We need to make sure we're like, okay, just because one person felt it, like we want to check is it impacting the community? Like what else are we not doing by fixing that now? But that culture of, we're working on this thing we're playing as well. I say we have different relationships with the game. Like not everyone plays the game. Not everyone plays it all the time, and many people go through phases, right? Like just like everyone who plays our game does, we come back, might dip in for an expansion or a patch, or there's a period in their life where they're not playing as much. But all of that feedback is relevant. Yeah.
Another thing too is just that we're personally very passionate about what we do, because we love the game, because we love the world that we're building, and that I think helps us really like drive these things forward, and expect that everyone else sitting at the table has that same level of passion for what we're doing, and they're bringing their best intentions there, and they're really trying to make the coolest thing. It allows us to have really honest conversations with each other to get to the best ideas and to get to the best solutions, and also to realize when we're not there yet.
Yeah.
You mentioned the relationship between development and the player community. There's a question here from Brooke, who asks, do you have any examples of times player behavior created or inspired a new mechanic or new content?
I don't have any off the top of my head, but that happens all the time, Eli. Do you think about that? Throwing Eli under the bus.
Wait, I'm thinking about that. Let's come back to that one. Let's go to the next one. We're going to think about this and come back with something for it.
Hardcore for Classic springs to mind there. It's kind of like a self-directed experience.
That's true, yeah.
Classic, but yeah.
Even Classic itself, really, right? Like the love of that game really inspired us to go back and bring it to everyone again.
Here's one for Eli specifically, from Tyler. What design principles help keep the rendered cinematics feel as identifiably Warcraft as the gameplay world?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. This, it's an interesting topic, because if you look past cinematics, something like a Mists of Pandaria cinematic looks very different than a BFA cinematic or a War Within cinematic. But really, the thing that keeps them, feeling authentic, in my opinion, is understanding what the characters and the world are at a very core level. Because there's a significant amount of interpretation that has to happen between the game world and what we see in a pre-rendered cinematic. As you know, like the game world is very stylized, the proportions are exaggerated, the forms are big and bold, the color is bright and vibrant. And when we translate that into a pre-render, we really have to think about how do we represent those same strong, identifiable, iconic forms and features in a way that feels realistic and believable at a cinematic level. And I can tell you that we get into the weeds, like really far into the weeds, and really dissect every element, because of that amount of interpretation, things have to change pretty significantly. Everything from the detail level of a trim on Anduin's armor to the way we're representing his beard and his hair, the cape on his back. his sword, the sword makes a lot of sense in the game with a floating piece. A little bit different in the cinematic. So we have to really think about how are these things going to play in a realistic sense and try to service the fantasy, right? Try to service the experience, the remembrance, the sort of mind stamp that we have of these things. And it's difficult at times. I can't tell you how many hours and weeks we have spent on a singular character. It's a challenge, and I don't have a good answer. I mean, it's just a lot of hard work and a lot of really passionate people challenging each other week over week to try to hit the thing that feels most authentic. And for my part, a lot of it is trust, when you're sitting at a table with people that are so extremely talented at filmmaking and creating these pre-rendered cinematics, it would be very easy for me to apply a lot of authority and direction on that to try to really push it into the game space and try to make it so purely the game vision. But I think the real magic there, my responsibility there, honestly, is to step back and trust their sensibilities, trust their acumen in that space, to have them lead the way a little bit about what's going to be the way to translate the themes and the characters and the world and the shapes and the forms and the details, so that they will read on screen, will have that effect of reality that we want to hit with these. So yeah, it's a difficult one. It's a complicated process, but it really does require a lot of trust between the two teams and a lot of partnership.
There's a question here for you, Darren. I really enjoyed the phrasing of it. It begins, with World of Warcraft going on for so long. It's been going on for a while. Does the engine used to make the game change over time, or is it patched over and over, retaining the original?
Yeah, it's the same engine, but it's an evolution over time for sure.
Version 11, is it now?
Yes, yeah. Every War Within is 11 dot. You've seen the patch numbers on the client in the bottom right. But yeah, like every, the bones are the same, but lots of pieces that have been replaced over the times through the pipelines to get from the tools the artists use to how it's rendered in game. And
absolutely,
yeah, it's fundamentally the same kind of concept about how the game loop works, but a lot of the render has changed, a lot of the animation system. We've added multi-threading in various places, but a lot of it is to serve kind of performances, view distances, things we talked about there. We're adding in new rendering techniques, and we talked about this a bit. It needs to retain the kind of very unique art style of WoW, which makes it timeless. So we look at a lot of new tools and techniques, and we incorporate it when it makes sense in a way that makes sense for us. And we'll keep evolving that,
Yeah, there's really interesting things that we add along the way. Wrath of the Lich King added something called vertex color, and it gave us the ability to, on top of the textures that were painted in the world, add an additional layer of color painting to shift hues or to add darkness or lightness. We didn't use it a lot in Wrath of the Lich King, but since, it's one of those features that was added that we have employed to great extent across the world, that's allowed us to add volume to forms, to add detail and interest to areas that otherwise wouldn't have it. And there's countless of those little feature sets that have been added along the way, and that's why I say I think it's version 11.
Yeah, different texture blending on the terrain, and different. You mentioned the grass, different ways we
LOD, view distance.
We've changed the water. We've changed
fog systems. Skyboxes, sky scenes now, where we can have 3D objects in the sky to allow us to do things like Beladar's crystal.
Yeah. The War Within did I mean, Hallowfall is amazing looking, and
It is.
but a lot of that kind of new layered fog is in Ringing Deeps and Hallowfall.
What about Airlock Tech? I mean, that was huge. It's a huge thing. It allows us to create seamless transfer from one area to another in a way that we were never able to do. I mean, we would have an expansion with at least 4 loading screens.
Yeah, the Airlock Tech was, that's what a lot of games call it that, but that was what I mentioned, the long tunnel to connect to Zaralak Caverns, which is essentially a loading screen where you have full dynamic control. And there's a lot just in our tool chain that we don't see, that how we're updating WoW at our tool. We're making it easier to create spawns. We're making it easier for world builders to build terrain, and and more to come there, right? We'll keep doing that for sure.
Yeah.
Sort of Ship of Theseus game engine. Let's take one other question, and then I want to do a little quick fire. How many people are involved in creating the riddles or secret puzzles that the community chases? Is there a secrets team?
I don't know.
Would you tell us if there was?
Yeah. Well, if I had a riddle ready that would give this answer, but there is. It's kind of like a puzzle enthusiasts team. It's like a loose collection through a mailing list, but I don't know how many are on it. But I know they greatly enjoy creating those for everyone.
I don't either currently. However, I can say that, like I said, level designers will often put a little thing in the game, and that might be a thing that, somebody working on an Easter egg might employ. But yeah, specifically how many, not sure.
It's classified information. All right, with our last 4 minutes, there are a few questions about favorites.
Okay.
So let's try to get through. Let's see how many we can get through. What was the most enjoyable raid to work on?
I'm going to say Dragon Soul. That was for me kind of my first big, I'd been on the team a little while. I kind of had found my footing, like the learning I mentioned, it takes a while. And then to work on like the, Deathwing's back and a bunch of tech we had to do for that. And definitely there's lots I've enjoyed working on, but that was kind of felt like a big moment. Like we're going to fight on this huge dragon. How do we make that real in phase 2 on his back, and phase 3, am I missing a phase? Phase 3, in the Maelstrom. Super cool.
I think Icecrown Citadel.
Say again?
Icecrown Citadel, I think, has to be my favorite.
What was the most fun biome to work on?
Ooh. Gosh, there's so many. I think probably if I had to pull one out of all of them, I think Suramar was probably one of my favorites to work on, because it had so many variations. I think we really pushed it a lot on that one too, so it was really very fun to work on. And of course the city itself, this is the first time we really built a city that way, that had that amount of density of propping and buildings and mood. Suramar for sure.
For me, and for engineers in general, we're usually across a lot of that. So my first thought was Argus, that I talked about earlier, just because it had such unique kind of gameplay to go alongside it. And then I also Zuldazar City, I particularly loved how awesome it was, but I worked on a bunch of work to update the maps when you press M to be higher resolution. A lot of it was designed specifically because of the detail in that city. So Zuldazar City feels...
Stormheim had a pretty awesome biome too. If you remember the yellow aspen forest, anybody remember that? There's a really beautiful and subtle color variation in the tops of those trees, right? The ranges just between yellow and yellow-green. I think one of the most beautifully handled color theory sets in the entire game.
Do you have a favorite or most memorable asset that you've worked on? Darren's secret spell.
Darren's secret spell, yeah. Darren's weapon trail. I mean, It would be those Mortal Strike related effects. Like, I didn't directly work on them, but the weapon trails are procedurally generated. So artists provide the texture, but like I provide a lot of the code that like made them have that curvature and that timing. So that's probably the closest I have to directly being on an asset.
I think one of my favorites, honestly, was a piece of key art that we did for Shadowlands that had Bulver standing in the foreground and Torghast Tower in the distance of the sky. I worked on that with Cole Eastburn, who did the character Bulvar, and I focused on the background. That was a really, really fun project to work on.
Horde or Alliance? Final question.
I don't know what Eli is, but for the Horde.
Obviously.
I play both. We love all of our children.
Eli is, yeah, he's right, but it's Horde.
This. You spend a whole panel talking about collaboration and then you won't buy into some like basic infighting? I can't believe it.
You know what? I started as Horde. I mained a Blood Elf Paladin for years and years and years. But yeah, recently I've been playing more Alliance, honestly, primarily because I want to experience that part of the game world.
Yeah, with Warbands, I've been playing more Alliance too.
Yeah.
I started as Alliance player and then...
I think the allied races too have been another motivator for me to really play both sides, because there's just so many awesome races to try to play.
Amazing. Right, we are exactly at time with many questions left, but I'm afraid they will have to wait. World of Warcraft will have to keep some of its secrets. Could we please give Darren and Eli a huge hand? Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for coming, everyone, and we love doing this, and we'll share this with our team, and this gives us so much energy. Appreciate all your questions.
Truly is an honor. I know we both feel just extremely honored to be here, that you all came out to see us and spend the evening with us. I know you could be anywhere else, and that you choose to spend it with us is truly pretty special.
Yeah, thank you. We've had a great time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.